discussion time, hopefully. But I would like to introduce myself. I'm Miley Karras. I'll be your moderator for the session today. I'm a clinician researcher and one of the co-directors of our San Diego Center for AIDS Research Clinical Investigations Core. I'm also the vice chair of the Underrepresented Populations Committee. But trauma-informed care has been in the clinical space for some time, and its principles is something that I'm very familiar with as an HIV clinician. It's now been pretty widespread implemented in HIV clinics, in pediatrics, OBGYN emergency rooms, and much broader than that. However, the incorporation of trauma-informed principles into research is still very new, but it's a great step towards bringing equity to research and to recruiting and retaining diverse persons. So we're really excited to be a part of this webinar and glad that you all could join us today. I'm very excited about learning from our panelists who's been practicing and really been vanguards in this space for some time. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start first with some brief introductions. Ms. Lothridge, would you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Lothridge. I am an individual that has been living with HIV. December will be 5 years that I've had my new best friend in my life. I currently work with Christie's Place, which is an agency that serves women, children, and families that are living with and or impacted by HIV. I am the Aging and Peer Navigation Program Supervisor here. And I also am a SDSU social work gerontology student, go Aztecs. And I'm happy to be here and very honored.
Dr. Klein?
Hi, I'm Gus Klein. I'm a research associate professor at Hunter College. I'm also the director of community engagement for the Einstein, Rockefeller, and CUNY CFAR.
Dr. Sales?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Sales. I'm an associate professor at the Rollins School of Public Health at Emory University. And I am also co-director of our Emory CFAR's Prevention and Implementation Sciences Core. A little bit about my research. I research in trying to use implementation science to integrate trauma-informed care into spaces that in places working with individuals living with HIV.
And Dr. Stockman?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamila Stockman. I am a professor at the University of California, San Diego, and I'm also co-director of the Health Equity Socio-Behavioral Science Core of our San Diego Center for AIDS Research. My research focuses on conducting both observational studies and intervention studies. So both of those arms, I integrate trauma-informed research practices into those areas, and populations of focus are socially marginalized populations, primarily in the US, both those living with HIV and those at risk for HIV.
We're also very fortunate to have our NIH colleagues here with us today, and they authored and will be briefly presenting a trauma-informed framework for use in the context of research.
Thanks, Miley. And let me share my screen. I have a few brief slides today, and this I think will be the only slides that we'll see during this presentation. That'll be more discussion focused. Can everyone see my slides? Great. Well, my name's Terry Sen. I'm a scientific program officer in the Division of AIDS Research at the National Institute of Mental Health. And I'm really pleased to be here today to talk about incorporating a trauma perspective into HIV-related research. And I really want to thank Miley Karras for suggesting this webinar, my NIH colleagues, Susanna Allison and Karen Parker, for their contributions to these slides, the UCSD CFAR for hosting the webinar, and of course, our amazing panelists who are going to bring some much needed community and researcher perspectives to this discussion today. I do want to acknowledge up front that this can be a difficult topic to talk about. So if you need a break, please take a minute, step outside, get a drink of water, step away from the computer, or whatever you need to do. I also note that there's recently been a movement away from using the term trauma-informed to focus on more positive or resilience aspects like healing-centered. But we chose to keep the term trauma-informed for the webinar today, as that's a term we thought that attendees might be more familiar with. So what is a trauma-informed perspective? Well, there are many different thoughts about what it means to be trauma-informed, but SAMHSA has really been a leader in this area and has developed a set of key assumptions around a trauma-informed approach, which include realizing the impact of trauma and the effects that it can have, recognizing the signs and symptoms of having experienced trauma, responding to that by implementing policies and procedures throughout the organization or research team, and resisting re-traumatization, which would include recognizing practices that might lead to trauma-related distress. And importantly, this can include trauma-related distress not only for patients or participants, but also for staff members. And a trauma-informed perspective, as Miley said, has really been most frequently applied to caring for patients, and many of you might be familiar with the term trauma-informed care. But trauma-informed isn't actually an intervention per se, it's more a set of guiding principles, and so these principles can also be applied to research. And all research could likely benefit from taking a trauma-informed perspective, but it seems particularly important for HIV-related research, given the high rates of trauma and violence experienced by many people living with HIV and by many people who may benefit from HIV prevention. So in this chart, you can see the high prevalence of intimate partner violence, as well as other types of abuse that were experienced by women living with HIV, rates that are 2 to 3 times higher than among women not living with HIV. And although this study is specific to women, there are similarly high rates in other groups as well. And there are other types of traumas that are experienced at high rates, such as stigma and discrimination, poverty, and lack of safe housing. And trauma might impact people's experiences participating in research. So how does one take a trauma-informed perspective in research? Well, we are going to hear some on-the-ground views on that, which I think are going to be the most interesting and informative. But first, I'll give just a few examples, which come from a paper that Susanna Allison, Karen Parker, and I published in the Journal of the International AIDS Society. And we can really integrate a trauma-informed perspective at every stage of the research project. So even when we're developing research aims, we can be working with the community to develop the aims and make sure that they're taking this trauma-informed perspective. And even at this very early stage, we can be thinking about the potential impact of trauma on study outcomes that we want to look at. In terms of staff support and training, for supporting staff, we should recognize that staff themselves might have experienced trauma and develop procedures for addressing staff distress. And then in terms of training staff, we can make sure that staff are trained in the signs and the impact of trauma, and as well as trained on procedures for addressing potential psychological distress. If the research that we're doing involves an intervention, while we're developing that intervention, we can make sure that we're recognizing the impact of trauma on health and behavior, and how trauma might make it more challenging for people to engage in healthy behaviors. We can make sure that everyone's trained to address trauma-related disclosures in an empathetic way. Avoid distressing language in the intervention. Be aware of power dynamics, particularly between the person delivering the intervention and any participants. And also get community feedback to ensure the intervention is not re-traumatizing. In terms of when the study is ongoing and the procedures, we can recognize trauma as a potential barrier to participation or retention. And we can ensure that the consent process does not reinforce feelings of powerlessness. And finally, when we're interpreting study findings, we again want to think about the potential impact of trauma on study outcomes. And we want to ensure that community members are involved in the interpretation of findings. And I'd like to thank you for your attention. And now I'll turn it over to Miley to introduce the next portion of the webinar.
Thank you so much, Terry. This is now where it's going to get fun. We are going to hear from our panelists about their experiences and their comments about how do we implement this trauma-informed research. So we're going to start with a question. Describe how you're incorporating trauma-informed practices into your research and what the experience has been like.
So I can go as far as my experience of incorporating trauma-informed practices into research. One, more so important, getting that consent, being clear with the individuals that are participating, making sure they understand the study. Let's see, what else? It's going to definitely help to enable people to feel more comfortable, feel like it's okay. I feel like they're actually contributing to something, not just going for monetary reasons. You know, so just being mindful of the individuals that you are engaging with, the words that you are using. So I'm going to share this experience. I'm going to try to be as quick as possible, but so this is my experience with studies for the first time. Short version, I was watching a movie. I don't remember the name of the movie. These people were in need of various financial support. So they tore a little tab off of various advertisements for us to participate in a study. Everyone shows up in the room for the study. The facilitator walks into the room. He thanks everyone for participating in the study. And he says, and now the study is going to begin. He pulls a gun out and he shoots one of the participants in the head. This was my first experience with a study. It's a movie. So based on that movie, yes, I know I don't want to participate in studies at all. Ultimately, the study was about observing how individuals react in a stressful environment. So, but it's just things like that, reassuring us that no, studies aren't going to be that way. And once stepped into the world of HIV, I began learning more about the clinical studies, the importance of the clinical studies, and how we are lacking the participation of human beings of all different racial backgrounds. And this is what is needed to provide better care for us. And so my experience since that movie, I've actually participated in studies and I have no complaints. Period. I'll stop.
I can chime in. I think that's amazing, Jen. And just to piggyback off of what Jen was sharing in terms of the importance of participants and really integrating folks with lived experiences into the work, from the conceptualization of the project all the way to the dissemination of study findings, is critical. And in doing so, we view those individuals as experts, but we also need to ensure that we're providing sufficient training. And in the provision of training, not just training focused on the research and the procedures, but training in terms of how to handle re-traumatization, what resources are available. And there are, in addition to institutional trainings, there are external resources out there, that could be supplemented with what is provided institutionally. So, ensuring that is at the forefront is really important. And then I'll just mention two other ways that I'm integrating trauma-informed research practices. One has to do with safety. So really ensuring that, staff are, have the safety provisions in place, whether it be physical safety. So if there's specimen collections at a household, ensuring that, there's been communication with the participant in terms of what the environment is like, ensuring that there's not just one staff member going to retrieve the specimens, but there are two at least. And then safety in terms of the actual participant safety as it relates to their participation on the research project. So just as an example, a current project that I'm working on, we have a two-tiered screening process in place where we have a basic screener, and then based on that basic screener, if there are flags that the participant is in a currently abusive situation or relationship, we have a follow-up screener conducted by one of our intervention specialists. So this person has background in providing therapy, and so a licensed clinical therapist provides this second level screener to ensure asking a number of safety focused questions that the participant is in a safe situation to be able to participate further in the study. So integrating those measures. And then finally, in terms of just the overall procedures, so data collection procedures, really being mindful of participants and where they are in their trauma. And, some participants may not be able to complete their study visit in one session. They may require multiple sessions. So really being flexible, training the staff to be flexible and mindful of folks' experiences, where they are currently, and where they are currently may not equate to where they are next week, especially in the context of an intervention. So just being flexible in that regard. And I'll stop there.
I think that everything that said are really valuable, and a lot of things that we try to do within our work, especially when your research focuses on assessing trauma or violence among individuals. These are practices that are really important, and ones that we might have adopted a little bit earlier than some of the other folks working in other areas in HIV research, but are really salient for anyone in this field, I think. And just to add to the other points, some things that we have done include not just thinking about those training opportunities for staff and for folks around bringing awareness of trauma, and then how to be recognizing signs and signals of distress in your participants, but it's an ongoing conversation, and something that we include a lot in our team debrief meetings on a weekly basis, just to really make sure that we're also being able to support, learn from experiences that some of the individuals on our study team have had with particular participants. We have a couple of psychologists on our team who participate in those ongoing training and learning opportunities through that debrief as well.
I think I can build a little, but I think everything folks have said already is really salient and important. And I think there are a couple of things for me in terms of a trauma-informed approach. It's really understanding that it's not just about, this is talking about specifically if you are working with, or your research is specifically focused on trauma, but from a trauma-informed approach, it's really about systems. It's about policies and procedures. And it's about really understanding and thinking about, kind of similar how Jamila talked about in terms of specimen collection, which is like a universal precaution model. So that we're also thinking about the fact that, like, as Terry showed in her slide, that like the kind of prevalence of trauma within specifically HIV research, we don't even need to know. I think with the trauma-informed approach, we're acknowledging that this is what people's experiences are, this is what the data says. And so we're trying to create environments that allow for both your staff and both the participants to participate in a way that doesn't re-traumatize. I think that one of the ways in which currently we have a study that is actually looking at developing an evidence-based kind of researcher level intervention around working with trans and non-binary individuals. So what does it look like to be trauma-informed within this research? And so for us, it's really a dual process, right? It's not just about how we approach both the questions we ask, the procedures, how we give folks choice in who they're interviewed by, And that also goes both ways. So though in terms of our researchers who are working with our study team, allowing them to have some agency over who they're also doing, especially if you are engaging and have folks who are part of the community that you are doing research with. I think it's really important. I know that we often hire folks, and depending on how small the area is, obviously I'm in New York City, even so it's a big place, but that doesn't mean that the community isn't still small. And I think the smaller the place gets, the more people know each other. And while that's a real benefit, I think that it also can be, sometimes people don't want to talk about their most traumatic experiences with someone that they may see out at a community event. And I think really acknowledging that. I think that another way in which we're trying to really incorporate these practices is I think giving folks enough also, like, I think partly what's been coming out of our research, I can say, is that oftentimes it's not just the questions that you expect that would be hard for folks to answer. It's the ones that we ask that are like about education or income, that what happens is we don't think that those may stir something up, but they do. And I think part of what that means is we're trying to also prepare our staff and our team to actually interview and interact and understand that this could happen broadly, that there isn't just because you're asking, and that folks may be used to talking about their trauma. And so they may have so that may also, what we may think is going to be a hard thing for folks to talk about may not be. And so it's trying to give people the skills, the skills, not just to know that trauma, is the prevalence of trauma, but to also help them really, to kind of interact and deal, both taking care of themselves as well as the participants in our study.
That's so great. Jamila, you mentioned resources. I'm interested to hear from you all. What types of resources do you view as really key to implementing trauma-informed research? And these can be resources that currently exist or maybe you wish existed.
I can jump in and talk about some resources that we use on our projects. A lot of them we ended up developing. There weren't a lot of tools or existing necessarily or easily identifiable trainings around like trauma-informed practices that we could find. So we have those. We have a training that's on cultural humility, and doing that for our study team are some of the resources that we've used. But also thinking about having and developing comprehensive resource and referral materials for participants as well as for the staff on our project. Sometimes the work that we're doing, acknowledging that this is impactful for and can have a high rate of emotionality for the not just for participants, but also for the staff. And so making sure that they know where they can get support and resources as well. And then really developing pretty specific SOPs for staff and the whole study team, and training them regularly and updating those things as you learn throughout the research process or things change in the environment. So those are a couple of resources that I think have been really essential for making this work.
I have to agree. I think that, not to repeat anything that Jessica has stated, some additional resources that we have found to be useful in preparing staff is looking outside of, thinking about resources that are available from service organizations or community-based organizations. So, for example, all of our staff complete the training that is available through Mental Health America. And that has been a nice supplement to the training that we already have in place. And, some of the training that Jessica had already mentioned. But so looking outside beyond what we would traditionally think to include as a training resource. And then in terms of I think for participants, in addition to providing them resources and what has been really helpful for participants to be successfully linked to outside services and also remain engaged in the continuation of receiving those ancillary support services has been the warm handoff process. And, you know, we think of a warm handoff in our minds as something that can be easily done, but it's very difficult at times, especially when you think of, you know, geographic settings where there aren't a lot of resources available. So I think what I haven't seen across research studies, which I think would be useful, is really kind of integrating the how-tos of conducting, you know, the warm handoff referrals process. I think that would be really helpful. I think everyone does it a little bit different, and it is a time-consuming process. And, you know, folks may do it early on in their study, and then we do it early on in the study to identify the services, and then at different times throughout the study, you know, remain engaged with those services to see, okay, is there a change in staff? You know, the contact person. But when it is established, I feel like that goes a long way with study participants, a long way.
I just want to piggyback off of all of the awesomeness that's already been shared about resources, and just ensuring that individuals, you know, they have that cultural humility, being self-aware. These are resources that, you know, some people may not think of as tangible, but they're important when you're engaging with individuals that have been impacted by, you know, whatever it is in their daily life that they're dealing with. For example, here at Christie's Place, as a resource we use for our clients that ultimately anybody on the planet can participate in, is our cultural humility training, just to help give you the tools. But, you know, something just simple as words, like for example, the wording we use, you hit the nail on the head, you know, that's something we don't want to do. So, well, yeah, so it's changing that language. But it's difficult because we don't know what we're going to say that's going to trigger somebody. We don't know that. It's just important to be able to recognize, have that tool of being able to recognize an individual's body language, you know, how they respond, and then that can help them, you know, guiding them through the way, engaging with that individual. Integrating trauma-informed research, things like this are well worth it, because the more informed the individuals are, the more of an informed decision they can make, even about how they want to respond. If they know, if we are open with them, they can help be, you know, feel more comfortable, maybe not be on edge a little bit when they're engaging. And these are things, just as you're building that rapport, that can definitely impact that individual, so that when they go out into the world, oh yeah, I participated in this study, and oh, and this was cool, and that was cool, and da 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 da, you know, they can pass on that word, and then that word can cause that person to maybe participate in the study. And for the sake of my social work research class, that would be called snowballing. So I don't know if she's on here, but just to say that, yes, I am internalizing this information. But that's a good example, you know, how we treat the individual, the word is going to spread, you know, and then, yeah. Okay, that's it.
I think I'm going to talk a little differently about resources. I think we first and foremost, when implementing a study, we already know that when we're also working with communities or doing community-based research, we don't have enough time to really build even the trust that is needed to do this research. So my first and foremost is we need to have more time and money as resources to actually do this work. I think the other part that we need is to really train researchers, because you know, to try to I think, you know, this is not a new concept, right? SAMHSA spent millions of dollars to come up with this model, and it is being implemented in specifically like substance use settings. I would say more so than anything, and I think that people use the term of trauma-informed care and approach, but that there isn't really, there aren't really clear implementation strategies for how to do that across the board. And so I think that there needs to be more training also within HIV, that a lot of what we look at our risk behaviors are actually adaptive coping strategies. And so that when we talk about stigmatizing and stigmatizing language and also stigmatizing people and the targeting that we do, what we're actually doing is reinforcing a lot of the trauma that people have already experienced. And I think that we need really not only a cultural shift, but a systematic shift to begin to embed this in this, because people don't need to assess risk anymore. They need to heal. And so what we need to do as researchers is move toward that. And I think that requires a paradigm shift, and it also requires both funders and other researchers to also reach out to community-based organizations that are doing this, so they can actually understand what they're doing and what works. Because if we don't do that, we're just going to be cycling through and re-traumatizing people.
That's so great. I am going to take the moderator's privilege and skip a question. So we're going to go one more question ahead. If researchers could take one step or do one thing to make their research trauma-informed, what would you suggest that they do?
I think one suggestion, and this is coming up from our research, because the study we have is interviewing researchers that do HIV stigma research with trans folks, mental health clinicians, and now we're also in our phase of interviewing community folks who participated in this research to hear what their experience has been like. But a big one of the things that has kind of come across is that researchers need to actually experience the procedures and the questions that they are asking people. And I think that because I think unless we do that, there is no way that we're going to understand how that's going to land. Like, if it makes us uncomfortable, please think about what it's going to make. If I don't like a blood draw and my veins are not that good, think about how that might be if you're doing a study with HIV, with people who are HIV positive, who get a lot of blood draws, or people who are injection drug users. I think we need to think about what our study procedures are and what we're actually doing that can kind of create and lead to that bad. It isn't just that people are mistrustful. It's that a lot of what they're experiencing is just recreating a lot of the harm that is just perpetuated, specifically within healthcare.
I would say be flexible in terms of so I'm going to say two things. Sorry. Be flexible while being inclusive of community. So really make sure that you are engaging community and the folks that you are trying to serve, and really listen to them. Don't just do it to check off a box and say that you've checked this box off, but really engage those particular individuals, hear what they have to say. It goes along the lines of what Gus was saying in terms of the whole process of the procedures. Does this work? If not, what do they think will work? And really listen to that. Yes, we know the science is the science. We've been funded to do the work in a particular way, but there are subtle deviations and accommodations that can be made to further engage and reach the population of interest. So flexibility is key.
I'm going to piggyback off of what Ms. Jamila said. And in addition, even though, as far as I know, there's a good effort being done in this area, but incentives, reaching out to individuals, dangling that carrot, yes, but just the incentives, can go a long way. Oh my gosh, I gotta go for my second visit and I don't have gas money. You know, that's traumatizing for some people, because do I go to this appointment, or do I put gas in my car so that I can take my child to school? So finding a way to maybe enhance the incentive programs. I mean, yeah, that's one of the things I would say.
Just to add to the things that have already been thrown out there, I do think that something that's important is, and Gus, you brought this up earlier, around moving away from centering all of this around trauma and really thinking about this as from a healing perspective and what that takes. And that's one of the reasons I've always loved trauma-informed care and gravitated towards it, is because it's a strengths-based approach. It's a resiliency-focused model. And so thinking about when you introduce it that way as a resilience and strengths approach, what and how do we do this through all levels of our research and team? When can we celebrate and just acknowledge the incredible strength and resiliency from everyone? And so I think that's been one of the things that we try to do. And also recognizing that self-care is important, and of the study team, and not just when you are working in a topic and with folks that you know, have a lot of hard lived experiences, finding opportunities to celebrate the positives and the wins, and remembering to do that within your study team and with the participants that you engage with.
So what are some of the barriers at multiple levels to uptake of these principles, as particularly in research? What suggestions do you have for encouraging broader uptake of these principles? And I guess you already mentioned time and money.
I think it could be really noted about the resources and availability. I don't know about you all, but sometimes, you know, it's nice to have an example or to see it and have it accessible. So a toolkit around how to make your work more resiliency focused and informed. And so I think that could be a helpful way to really speed up the adoption of this this type of approach across other research teams.
Something I think can be beneficial is to go outside of your comfort zone when you are connecting with individuals. Different areas, especially when you're wanting to reach populations that traditionally don't participate in studies. So if they're not coming to you, then you might have to go to them and come up with ways to engage on a more on the ground level with individuals. An example I can give is here at Christie's Place, we've partnered with, is it from in AVRC? And they actually come to when we have our groups with our ladies, and they talk about studies. They present, you know, the studies that they have coming up, just to help you know, kind of soften individuals' hearts on the idea of participating in study. Again, knowledge is power. So if I'm actually coming to you, taking time to share this information with you, then that might help individuals open up more. A prime example, this morning, I was talking to an individual that actually participated in a presentation we had last week about studies and things like that. And her words, she was talking about the cannabis study, and she said, you know, I've never done cannabis. I'm a virgin. So what the heck, she said. And she said, you know, they can get a new perspective. So just by someone coming and sitting down and talking with the women, it's opened up someone's of many's mind to, you know, consider participating in something they probably wouldn't have never thought of doing before. So yeah, hopefully that.
I would say that in addition to toolkits, so, you know, having the toolkit, I think, is amazing. And alongside that, you know, short snippets of best practices. but dissemination, how does that information then get to the researchers or even new investigators entering the field? So I think we have to be creative in terms of thinking about how we can best disseminate that, whether it be, I don't know, through the CFARs or, beyond NIH and beyond funders, really integrating that into training programs that focus in this area or intersecting areas, I think would be really critical and important as well.
I mean, I think everyone has already said a lot of what I think is it kind of important. And I think the hard part is that some of this doesn't even exist, that we've all had to do this ourselves, right? So I think some of it is how do we also, because while a lot of our research does sometimes, because they happen in practice settings or they mirror things that may happen, they're an intervention that could also be happening in a practice setting. But then there are specifics to research that kind of we have to think about really how, at every level of the process, how are we incorporating these principles? And it may be that like it's not possible to implement every one of them at each step, but really how, like thinking about from kind of the beginning, like even in your pre-implementation or even before, like even it's an iterative process, I think, even as you are implementing the study, because things happen and you need to respond to that and you need to kind of understand. I think that it's really necessary that again, I think it's really just like it's valuing that the people who participate in our studies are people, and also the people who work with us are also people, and so that rather than that they're data points or that they're participants. And someone in the chat is actually talking about saying organizational, institutional kind of leadership buy-in and support. I think that is key. I think that if we don't have that and we're kind of pushing, because in many ways, even though within practice and within social services, trauma-informed care is nothing new, we're kind of pushing against the stream. Because I think when you think about health disparities and you think about how public health kind of operates, I think more of it is really kind of how do we kind of incorporate even just this, how do we incorporate this approach even in just kind of the ways that we have our meetings and talk about participants that are in our study? How do we, what are the titles that we use when we publish our papers, like, or when we go up and we present at conferences? I think it's about taking a step back, I think, and kind of thinking about what am I trying to communicate and why? And I think that there's a lot to that step, taking a step back, that could be really helpful, I think.
I just want to add one more thing. As I was listening to Gus speak about when it comes to the language, as we start to use proper language, it can, or change the language we use, it can definitely catch. For example, I was attending the International HIV and Aging Conference a few weeks ago. And something that was brought up is when we used the term subject. And what he did was, the slides he posted for subject was, wow, I forgot her name, Queen Mother, let's say it like that. Queen Mother and her subjects behind, he's like, these are subjects. So every time he said, subjects, these are subjects. So something like that, if you're talking to other providers and other professional individuals and they hear you using, like Gus said, participant, as we start using these languages more, frankly, the idea is other people will pick up on it and see how much better it sounds and can make the individual feel.
So we wanted to have some Q&A time from people participating. There are a couple of questions that I'm going to start with that are already in the chat. You're welcome to either write your question in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I'm going to try and see if I can catch you. But one of the questions that was on our list that we haven't addressed yet sort of dovetails with the first question that was asked. So one of our participants said that there was a multi-year community embedded study on sex workers. The PI of the study ignored and isolated staff and participants who disclosed gender and political bias by study staff. What is the role of accountability mechanisms realistically when experiencing exploitation by powerful institutions? Our NIH colleagues, please feel free also to chime in to that question. Again, I'll ask the question, what is the role of accountability mechanisms when experiencing exploitation by powerful institutions?
I'll just state at a minimum, you know, there is the IRB, and on the consent form, you know, participants, and I know this involves study staff as well, but there is that line at the end of the IRB, I mean, at the end of the consent form with the contact information of the IRB representative that folks can contact. I don't know anyone who has had to do that, but I'm assuming that the IRB itself would have processes in place to deal with complaints such as this.
So I think there are a couple of things that I think the IRB, I think also, you know, if it's a staffing, it's HR in Turkey talking about that. I feel like, you know, this is an experience that happens, and I feel like that people feel or not feel they're being disempowered, and they're also being, you know, harmed in these settings. And so I think that, you know, my hope would be that some of our colleagues from NIH would also be particularly, or they would know, or like, I feel like there has to be, this is a question that comes up. I think that we need clear guidance on what to do. I do know of examples of where participants in studies have actually kind of come together and actually gone and written letters and to both the IRB, to the university, to hold faculty accountable or PIs accountable. But I feel like those are really, you know, there's no system for that. That's just kind of that's just like an organizing technique.
So this is Karen. I do know that NIH has some structures in place of places where you can contact. There's an extramural research integrity office that people can reach out to and connect with NIH about, because, you know, by and large, NIH is very concerned about these kinds of issues. And so, you know, I'm happy to put that email in the chat if that helps in terms of promoting that. But NIH does have some infrastructure in place for these kinds of issues. And that also goes for staff that are on research studies.
And I think, you know, in addition to this, you know, to the contact that Karen can put in the chat, you know, I think, as Karen noted, you know, NIH is very concerned about the research that we're supporting. And if this is an NIH supported study, then I think we would encourage the person to reach out to the program officer that's overseeing that grant. If they don't know who that is, you can find that information on NIH Reporter and reach out via email and explain the situation. And as Karen stated, there are definitely mechanisms and processes in place at NIH to respond to issues like this.
I'm going to ask another question. This is a little different. And forgive me for slightly rephrasing this question. The question is really asking about how do we encourage our funders, particularly our government funders, to ensure that there are adequate representation from populations that are not normally or historically underrepresented, for example, women or trans persons, so that we have a better understanding of how not to traumatize them when they're participating in research?
I think that would be going back to what I was suggesting about actually going to those specific areas that you're looking to, or encouraging the government and the funders about maybe going to those areas, sending individuals to those areas to recruit and educate first and then recruit maybe. Besides getting on with the bullhorn and telling everyone they need to participate more. Sorry, never mind.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, you know, NIH is very dedicated to including a diverse range of people in the research that we fund. There is the Office on Sexual and Gender Minority, or the SDMRO, which is what Karen heads up, and their office is dedicated to increasing the amount of research that's being funded by NIH, specifically focused on sexual and gender minority individuals. And Karen and her team have done an amazing job over the last, you know, however many years in increasing the research that NIH supports. There's also the Office on Research on Women's Health as well. That's also dedicated to increasing representation of women in the work that we fund. So we're definitely focused on this. We can always do better. But you know, we encourage researchers to put in applications that focus on women, that focus on transgender and gender diverse individuals. We can't fund it if we don't get it. But just to let you know, NIH is definitely very committed to including and funding research on a really diverse group of individuals.
And maybe to that, I'll just add, please, if you are thinking about applying for research for a population that you think is understudied, please reach out to a program officer and we would be happy to talk with you. And then since women were specifically mentioned, I'll just quickly mention that NIH is having a virtual workshop on research in HIV in women. That's going to be on March 21st and 22nd of 2024. So I think we are working diligently to try to increase the research that's being done with some of the populations that have been historically neglected.
This is another tough question, but it's a good question. None of these are easy, but I'm glad that we're all being challenged to kind of co-develop solutions together. So how do we convince / encourage large trial networks to integrate trauma-informed and healing-centered designs in their design of clinical trials, particularly those that involve the US and international?
I hate to put it back on our colleagues at NIH, but I do think that there could be some requirements. You know, we're asked to include human subjects in specific plans, and it could be that they have to think about integrating these practices into their research designs. So I think that's the biggest way, maybe retrospectively capturing the ongoing networks, but moving forward for any new planned cohort studies or networks.
Yeah, and I think I would just add, you know, right, NIH does fund a range of different HIV focused networks. So I would, you know, encourage you to reach out to an NIH person who is involved in that network and try to kind of bring them on board as well. If you're not sure who that person is, feel free to reach out to Terry, Karen, or I, and we can figure it out with you. Sometimes it helps, especially with these large networks, to sort of have a NIH ally on your side, if you haven't already.
And to be patient. A lot of these big organizations, they've been doing what they've been doing all these years. And if in their minds it's been working, you're going to you can potentially encounter resistance to changing how they do things, opening up their minds to thinking outside of that box. So patience is definitely needed.
So I love this question, but it is also along the same vein of questions that we've been talking about up to now. This is actually a little bit different. So it talks about potential traumatization of minority researchers. So the context is, editors often seek out for a paper that is focused on transgender persons. An editor may actually seek out a transgender or trans-identifying reviewer or researcher to do the review. However, sometimes, or maybe more often than not, this can actually, while well-intentioned, it can actually be traumatic to the trans-identified reviewer, as many of these articles reinforce stigma and are often poorly written, and really expose that particular research team's lack of experience in the field. The questions specifically are, how can researchers hold editors at these journals accountable to take responsibility to prevent these types of traumatic experiences? And how can researchers from the subject population, for lack of a better word, protect themselves from trauma removed of refusing to review potential publications?
So I'll just jump in here for 1 second. I think these are really important questions. And in some ways, I think that they mirror, how can we hold people accountable related to peer review, right? Or other kinds of situations that are similar to this. And I do think that I'll just say from my perspective at NIH, right, where I interact with a lot of people at NIH, for a lot of people, it's not necessarily in the beginning holding people accountable. It's talking to people and educating them, because I think a lot of people, and I suspect there could be journal editors who literally haven't thought of this. It hasn't occurred to them, oh wow, look what this could be doing to people, right? And so I think in some ways, opening the door and having a conversation and exposing people to things that they maybe haven't been exposed to is kind of the first step, right? And then once we feel like, okay, people now people should kind of know, and once we know we can do better, then I think we really start thinking about how can we hold these people accountable, right? But this definitely made me think of the same issue in terms of peer review. And so at least I'll say in peer review, the stuff that I hear about related to NIH is there aren't enough people from the community on the peer review panels to look at the research. And yet you can have these exact sort of situations happening when people are reviewing research applications.
Well, we are nearing our end. I would like to open up to the panel if there are any last words or final pearls of wisdom before we close out. I will say, please provide reviews and comments. We want to always be doing better. I think we'd love to continue to focus on these types of topics. So let us know if there's anything that you're interested in, or what you would have wanted from this webinar if it wasn't what you thought it was going to be. But after that, please, panelists, close us out.
I think one of the things I just saw in the chat that I want to raise, and yes, it's my colleague, so I feel it's really important, which is one of the things that is said is that all of us, we're journal editors, we're reviewers on panels. We need to hold ourselves accountable. We need to start doing this. We can't change anything if we don't participate. And I think that that is what all of us are kind of saying. It's like, we have to be there. We can't just punt the ball. And I think, Karen is an amazing job within NIH trying to make people care about SGM communities. And, as a member of the SGM community, I appreciate that tremendously. But that also is incumbent on me now to hold people accountable and to move this forward so that we can actually all be able to kind of work together.
I agree. And in addition to holding each other accountable, we have to be willing to share our knowledge with others instead of, starting from scratch. We've done it. There's other people out there who are doing it, and we have to be willing to share our knowledge.
I agree. I was just actually thinking we all need to make a toolkit with all of our shared resources.
So I just want to say, in addition to thanks to everyone for allowing me to share this space with you all, just so you know, by us having this conversation, you are doing it. You are making that change. You're taking the steps that it is needed to begin moving forward to bigger and better things within the research community. And by us preparing ourselves now, we will be ready to engage all those masses of individuals that are going to start coming to participate to help advance research, medicine, and better healthcare for the next generations of human beings to come. So thanks. Keep up the good work.
All right, everybody, thank you so much for your time and attentiveness, and hopefully we will see you all soon.